Hey everyone, it's Samuel.
I'm Jared Bornagle.
I'm Lex.
I'm Star Shinobi.
My name is David Tilstra.
I'm Benjamin.
And welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons and Dragons. Today on the podcast, a roundtable discussion about travel. Hey everybody, I hope everyone out there listening is having a great day. We have a special treat in store for you this evening or morning or whenever you happen to be listening to the podcast. We've got 5 awesome guests on to discuss travel, all with loads of DM experience, ready to share their particular opinions and philosophies regarding this important aspect of the Dungeons & Dragons play experience. Before we dive into the discussion, just some announcements to get out of the way. Remember to follow us on all our social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you'd like to listen to the podcast that way. Also, we would appreciate it if you could support us on Patreon. The release of the Ichmaset race just launched a couple weeks ago. Appreciate everyone's response to that. And in the next few weeks, we'll be releasing, because it won our poll, we will be releasing some new monster and NPC stat blocks for our homebrew world of Carrick. So that'll be coming down the pipeline for you soon. But yeah, I think that's all the announcements we have. So let's just dive straight into the discussion. First, let's give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is David Tilstra, and I like long walks on... I'm just kidding. I am the Dungeon Master for the Dungeons & Dragons 5e actual play podcast, From Afar podcast. I said podcast like 9 times in that sentence. But yeah, so we are just a bunch of friends basically who got together and decided we wanted to make a Dungeons & Dragons podcast that took place on the high seas. So if you're into pirates and krakens and magic and just 4 fools making goofs about everything, come check us out. So yeah, that's a quick blurb about me.
Sure. Lex, what about you?
Hi, I'm Lex. On Twitter, I am at CallMeVay. I'm currently working on a supplemental book for 5th edition called A Nazi's Almanac to Adventures and Adversaries. I'm doing that almost entirely on my own, so it's taken a while. I'm also currently working on a video essay series to talk about different ideas for multiclassing and some of the characters you can come up with that. And other than that, I have accidentally stumbled into being a voice for the Black community within the tabletop RPG community during, 2020. Nothing's happening there.
We certainly appreciate your voice. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Jared, what about you?
Yeah, I'm on a podcast called Monsters and Multiclass. Gist of it is each episode we take a different multiclass and break down both its mechanics as well as its role-playing viability. And then we'll go into a monster to talk about different uses from a DM perspective, as well as really how to fight against it as a player and just interesting ways to use it. And
Great.
You can find us at monsters_multi on Twitter.
Great. A Star.
Hi, I'm Star Shinobi. You can find me on Twitter at Star Shinobi. I am not doing anything nearly as impressive as everybody else, but I do have a little project of Daily D&D Magic where I just take prompts from Twitter and just turn them into useful to what I call pseudo-useful magic items. And you can find those either on my Twitter or Instagram at the same name. It's a little easier to find them on Instagram.
That's awesome. Ben, finally.
Yeah, I am Benjamin. I am the Dungeon Master for an actual play podcast called Lawful Great Adventures. It is a slow-paced, character-driven narrative travelogue. So it's really heavily focused on travel, character interactions, and kind of moving things a little more slowly than I think a lot of other podcasts do, which makes us different. And I'm just like thrilled to be on this discussion because I just love doing the I think travel is something that everyone has a hard time tackling, and I think that there's a lot of different ways to do it. So it's really cool to hear about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to have you and everybody here. And the first thing we wanted to do is just to give everybody a quick chance to lay out your own personal philosophy on travel, just in a couple minutes, just talk a little bit about what your own opinions are and how you use travel in your games. Obviously, the options for and the philosophies of travel in Dungeons and Dragons run the gamut from dealing with the hour by hour intricacies on one end of the spectrum to just complete Skyrim fast travel to the destination on the other end. And there are many factors that change how we handle this depending on the situation as well. The DMG, if you're interested, lists two of the main styles on page 106, if you'd like to reference that at home. One being the travel montage approach and the other being the hour by hour approach. And those are two of the main approaches that people tend to use, but there's lots of other ones out there. So again, just to start, let's each just take a couple minutes and describe how we use travel in our own games and what travel means to you. Ben, did you want to start?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The way I like to use travel is as an opportunity to let the narrative breathe. So if you'll imagine you're traveling from point A to point B, ideally you're traveling from point A because some kind of a narrative event has taken place, and usually the characters were part of that. And you're heading towards point B, which is where the next narrative thing is, and then you have all this space in between. So what do you fill that space with? You can fill that space with the ripples of what happened at point A. So like maybe a city burned down and you'll meet refugees fleeing the city, or you'll hear talk of travelers coming in, be like, oh, and they're asking the players what happened to the city, and those kinds of opportunities. In addition, you're heading towards this next location. You'll probably hear about that location, meet travelers from there, traders who go there. You'll pick up rumors and people will sort of talk about it. And there might be opportunities to seed in potential conflicts and issues that are going to happen at the next point by meeting people who are also on their way there, who are maybe just got kicked out of town. Maybe you meet an exile who just got kicked out by some evil vizier that the party is like, oh, we're actually going to go kill that guy. So any amount of foreshadowing or plot building that you can do that orbits your story, that's what I fill in the travel. I'll also use it to sprinkle in some unrelated lore. Maybe they visit a temple of some god, and that's just it. It's just this little one-off moment. And then, of course, there's downtime. And you can have little campfire moments, I call them, where the characters get an opportunity to talk about how they feel about things. So really, I think of it as an extension of the narrative, and I try to build it like you would a campaign arc. So I sort of roll all my random tables ahead of time, and I sort of have a day by day, maybe half day by half day, day night thing sort of planned out so that I know what's coming and I can weave it into a little story between stories, basically.
Awesome. Star, what about you?
This is kind of built around how my group likes to play. My group is very much a get the quest, let's hurry up and get there, and then hurry up and get back, get our reward, find the next one and go.
Sure.
So they're not really a bunch of talkers. So I tend to use travel as a way to expand our world a little bit. Make sure that they're encountering different people. I am not a fan of random encounters. So I'm usually a planned encounter kind of person. Whether that is something that can or may not turn into battle, it's completely up to my players' decisions. But a lot of what I like to do is I have actually personally a list of encounters that can happen at any time. And that's my random encounter. I know Midnight the Tabaxi is out there somewhere. He might show up if I roll the right number. So that's kind of how I like to do travel, is to expand it beyond what they're rushing to go do. They're very
Yeah.
focused.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Jared, what about you?
My philosophy is very much in line with Ben's. I think I really think it's a great opportunity to just keep I guess I like what you said about showing the ripples of things that they've done and places that they're going to go to. But with that, I will also add in that I don't think there's any reason that travel needs to break up whatever the main narrative is. And I'm not saying you don't agree with that, Ben, by any means. But very often I will use it to send in somebody's brothers hunting them down. Travel's a great time to bring up that type of interaction.
Sure.
Or just the strangers they meet along the way turning into a much larger encounter in a way that, based on the characters' actual storylines and like what they want to go forward through, they'd never run into, but it actually gives me an opportunity as a DM to kind of force them into situations that I think would be funny or just fun. I mean, I say, like having them travel through the desert with somebody that collects jackals. And they're like, why does this guy collect jackals? Well, he's actually a jackalware. There's no reason that a jackalware would ever cross paths with my party other than they're traveling from point A to point B across the desert. And hey, it might be good to have some companions in there. The other big point is I love to just make it a point of world building. Once you can include NPCs who have their own thoughts, their own opinions, and force them into a long country road with the party, it just gives them tons of time to reflect on everything. That said, my players get very, very bored of going back and forth to the same places. So once they discover a new location, we now fast travel back. It's basically like unlocking a fast travel point.
Makes sense. Lex, what about you and your games?
Well, I've been DMing for a while, and my philosophies on a lot of things have changed over time. My first campaign, I kind of hated. Well, one, I hate random encounters. I absolutely hate them. But my first campaign, I kind of got in the habit of just doing the fast travel thing everywhere, to the point where like I was young for my first campaign. I was like, let's give the party like a magic train that goes everywhere. So every time they traveled, it's like, let's hop in the train, and they didn't see anything.
Fantastic! Oh my gosh,
I love it. That's magical.
But now, like as I've gotten older, as I've DM'd more, one thing that I've kind of driven home to myself is that the world is as much as an NPC as anyone they can meet in the world.
Ah, interesting.
So traveling through is a great and easy way to just get an idea of where they're going. And even though they might not fight anything on the road, they can still see a monster running through the woods, might not attack them, but they'll know it's there. So in the future, they're aware of what kind of area they're in. If they see ghosts drifting through the forest, they know, hey, it's haunted, which doesn't have to amount to anything if they don't want it to, but they're aware. And if they meet people who live near these haunted woods, that means these people live near haunted woods. That tells you something about the people there. So it's kind of a way to inform them on things that might happen, give them clues, and give them, resources to handle what comes their way. Also, going back to what I think it was what Jared said, where introducing the ideas I've had, it's a great way. It's like, okay, they missed this opportunity back in this town. They didn't explore it. I just have them bump into it on the road.
Filler episodes.
Yeah, filler episodes. And also, if you're the type of person who sometimes forgets to plan stuff, if you let your players just talk, that's plenty of time to go through your notes.
best DM tip right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just talk amongst yourselves. Take all the time you need. By the way, what's your HP at? I don't.
just for someone else, for a friend.
David, finally, what about you?
I think I pretty much agree with what everyone has been saying. I think I too am like Star and Lex. Random encounters, I've done them in a couple campaigns I've run, and at least the way, because I'm still relatively new to DMing, at least the way I've been able to handle random encounters and my players have been able to handle random encounters, it has felt like it kind of slows the story down and kind of like adds some clunk to it. So with that, at least in the campaigns that I am running or been a part of, we've been actually pretty relaxed when it comes to traveling. Like sometimes like someone will like sometimes we'll be like, okay, you're going to Neverwinter now, like from X city to whatever, your new city. I'll just be like, I'll get you guys there unless you want to do something along the way. And sometimes that has proved to be really awesome. Sometimes that has proved to be really terrible. So I have not formed any great opinions on it yet because, like I said, I'm still relatively new to this whole thing. But I have seen a lot of really cool narrative story moments come from just giving your players a little bit of room of like, okay, you're in a wagon for the next 3 days. What are you going to do? And then like all of a sudden, without any planning or prompting from you, your characters are able to dive into this like really, really poignant, powerful moment. And I think those are the parts of travel that I'm all about, is like letting the story happen. But yeah, I think it really just kind of depends on who I'm playing with and kind of what the vibe of the session or the vibe of the game is. Like I've run a couple campaigns with people who are like super into like encumbrance and like I have this amount of gold, we all split this up, like you got this last magic item, so now I get this one, like very, very like thought out and organized, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I've found in those kind of games, the players are much more willing to like, okay, cool, like you take this watch, all right, now you go scavenge food, you get the firewood, like that kind of thing can be very, very enjoyable to a lot of different players. So I think this might just sound like a generic answer, and I'm probably going to say it a lot of times tonight. Like it just sort of depends on your party at that moment. Yeah. But I think kind of what Ben was saying earlier, like allowing the story to unfold and just breathe in those moments, I think can be so powerful. I think it can be really, really fun too.
Yeah, and it really is, because this is all about collaborative storytelling. That's what Plot Hooks is all about, and that's what all of our individual groups, whether they be streamed or not, it's about telling the story together. And if travel is not connected in some way, shape, or form to the narrative, then it is solely something which is just I don't want to say it's a waste of an episode, so to speak, but it's something that does not further any narrative point. It's just something to tide you over until you get to actually where you want to go, unless you're incorporating the story elements like the ripples, like you mentioned, Ben, like the character interactions, and that's my real philosophy about it is much like you, David. It is very flexible as far as exactly what happens, exactly how it's handled in that moment, whether or not it is something that needs to be drawn out more extensively or something that it can be more towards the fast travel end of the spectrum. It's whatever serves the narrative best. It's whatever is playing up the story and furthering the story along and making sure that everybody gets the story sense as you're going throughout your particular session and whatever campaign arc you happen to be at. One thing that several of you have mentioned is about the difference in terms of whenever you are doing the same travel again. Like unlocking a fast travel, like you mentioned, Jared. And there are, depending on what you're actually doing, is it a short journey? Is it a long journey? Is it a journey you've taken before? Those are all factors which change how we handle it in our narratives. So just to start, let's just take just a simple short journey that's never been made before, like a 2 or 3 day travel between towns. How do you all tend to handle that particular situation, just with a simple little journey, not necessarily too much danger. How would you handle just kind of this baseline scenario without any of the other factors added in on top? I guess David, we'll start with you.
That's an interesting question. I think that would, because okay, I come from like a background of improv, so I've done a lot of improv throughout the years. So I have brought that into my DMing style, which I know everyone does. I get myself into trouble a lot by relying on the fact that prepping for me is I'm not as good at prepping as a lot of other people. So a lot of times on like little short journeys like that, I'll just kind of offhandedly be like, okay, cool, yeah, whatever. You meet this person who, yeah, I guess he's kind of related to whoever in the story, and like my players will like latch onto that and just like kind of go crazy in that tangent, which I'm sure everyone has had experiences like that. So for shorter journeys like me, to kind of save my own skin, I have to handle little kind of off the cuff moments like that very carefully, or else I can be like totally unraveling or ruining my my story that I've been working on for a while. But I think that kind of aside, I think like more like the mechanics of it, I would probably just try to add like in just a little. I know I just said I hate random encounters, but I would probably try to add some sort of little like fight or puzzle or something. If it is just like, okay, this is kind of a throwaway 2-3 day journey, nothing's really gonna happen. I guess this could be a moment that's something that could be kind of exciting. So I would, depending on where the story, try to add something in, either like if my player offended someone at a tavern, maybe have that person come back and try to like close off that little story loop or whatever. But yeah, probably just try to add a little bit of something just to make it a little more spicy and a little more exciting for the quick journey like that. But yeah, I think that's how I would answer that question.
Sure, absolutely. Jared?
Yeah, so one of the first things I noticed is you said like it's a short 2-day journey, probably not that dangerous, and that's when I realized we're playing very different games. Because
that's true.
In my world, travel is supposed to be extremely dangerous. People will live their entire lives in the same city because the world is so dangerous. So for me, a short 2-day journey means I'm blocking off 6 different parts for each day. And I'm a total over prepper, by the way, just to get that out of the way. I will block it off into 3 different sections: morning, afternoon, evening, first watch, second watch, third watch. And I will have a written description for each section, sometimes brief, sometimes it will be an actual encounter, and that encounter better have real world implications. I don't like just doing a random roll on the table. If I do, it's just to get ideas, and I'll kind of build things from there. They're not always combat, but one of the major things that I try and get out of travel is resource draining. I mean, that's a huge thing in D&D for a table that enjoys combat, that it is difficult to really stretch your players' resources unless you're just throwing difficult encounter after difficult encounter at them. So instead, travel gives me a great opportunity to go, here's a medium encounter, here's an easy encounter where you're going to meet some bandits who are just like some teenagers and you're going to wipe the floor with them. But I got you to expend a couple 3rd level spells, so I'm happy. So that's how I set up a 2-day encounter. It's very much so detailed out. I love planning out every single second of it. But still, obviously, leaving room for the players to, get engaged with the small totem they found. And, I can ad-lib off that if I need to.
Sure. Lex?
For a short journey, one thing I keep in mind is that in general, if a party is leaving somewhere, someone got something new, be it an item or they leveled up or something. So often it's like, I want to use this new thing. And they might not have a reason to if you don't go, here you go. Here's a thing that is wildly convenient for you to try this new thing. One of my players, she's had me, because of how she plays, I've had to change how I run travel sometimes. Because not only is she playing a ranger, she's also like a vet, so she's extra aware of like, she's always cautious, and she's like we got to have the resources, we got to have the food, the water. And I'm like, but I wasn't going to care about that. But now you made me care. Thanks. But then just last level, she took the Gloomstalker subclass for Ranger, meaning when in darkness, she's invisible to anything that's dark vision, which I had to come up with a way to use that immediately because that is a super spooky ability that the party wasn't aware of. So I had like someone like just walk by at their campfire, and then she snuck away to be invisible behind them in case they did something, which let her try the new thing, let the party see another player being cool, which is always a fun thing, and it gave them a little moment. And it was for someone else too, but she also got to have a smaller moment for herself within it. That is the main thing I do with short travel, but also I try to remember that encounter doesn't mean a fight. It could also just mean random traveling merchant, or you can have a problem that isn't a monster to kill, like, oh no, the bridge is out. There is a flood by the river you have to cross, which, once again, an opportunity to use new abilities, water walk, stuff like that.
Awesome. Star?
Yeah, so this is kind of my first round DMing, and we're just getting into tier 2, so a lot of stuff is still very short travel for my group. They're an adventurers guild, so a lot of them is going to their guild, getting their job, going to do it, and coming back. So they are doing a lot of short journey. How I kind of went with short journey is I also, like the others, am a little bit of an over planner. So like I said, I kind of have a personal list of encounters that can happen at any time. So that's kind of my, I guess, random encounter table. But it's usually things like you run into a barricade that's blocking the road. How are you going to handle this? There's 2 people standing there. What are you going to do? I also, because of the nature of my players who pretend they're good, but they're not, we're lawful good creatures. Let's kill that guy. Why? I don't know. Well, okay. So I use short travel as an opportunity to use my reputation system. So they have opportunities to interact with people, and people who make it out of those interactions spread word of this group. My group likes to tell their name to everyone, so everyone knows the high five did this. So that's what I like to do, is give them interactions where they can start to build reputations. They don't know I have this system, but they start to hear things about themselves recently. So they're like, how do people know we're doing this stuff? And it's because people are, like I said, spreading the rumors of what they're doing. But other than that, it's a lot of building the world. I have another DM in my group, so I've tried to put a little bit different things in there. So there's Eldrazi in my world for anybody who plays Magic the Gathering.
Sure.
They're like an alien-like creature that's still very strange in my world. So it's that moment of they're going to figure out these are called the Doombringers, and there's a whole bunch of stuff to bring them for later. We're still kind of in that learning stage of there's weird things, and hopefully that will come together later. And that's kind of how I use my short travel at this point, is just to give hints.
That's awesome. We'll have to talk about that off air. I'm all about fighting Kozilek and Emrakul and doing all that. That'd be awesome. Ben, what about you on short travel?
A short trip for me, any travel is going to have a why behind it. Why are they going here? Why are they going there? And I try not to make that kind of frivolous, no matter how far away it is. So what I want to do is I want to get to why are they going there? Why are they leaving this place? And then what I want to do is I want to just grab a moment in there and either reinforce that why and add to its importance, or maybe even undermine it a little bit and pull the rug out so that they feel inner conflict about why they're going and doing this thing, and or maybe I can build some foreshadowing, just any little vignette. And actually, David, I loved your comment about taking loose threads and plugging them into short trips as an opportunity to tie stuff off. I'm taking notes over here. I'm going to steal like all of this stuff. But if there's a short trip, if they're going to visit a shrine or if they're going to meet with this person, then I want to have something that's going to either push the urgency of that mission for some reason, foreshadow some kind of a conflict, or potentially make them feel ill at ease about their decision, maybe hint at something they might have missed or something like that, so that they always feel like the world is moving independent of them. That's kind of a little smoke and mirrors trick that I like to do, and that's sort of how I like to handle very short jaunts. We also have a really quick downtime system that we all use. Everyone kind of has their downtime planned out, and I say, okay, what are you doing for camp activities? What are you doing for camp activities? And we just bang through them. So a 3-day trip might be an opportunity for my enchanter to, whip up an axe or something over that time and add a +1 to it or whatever there. So, we've passed an entire week of in-game without an actual encounter, just blowing through that because I just didn't happen to have something that week. So, yeah.
Sure. Again, just starting from this really simple baseline of a short trip, then you start adding layers to it. And I know with what you mentioned, Jared, even with a short trip in your group, everything is still very regimented, and there is stuff planned out for specific times, and the way that it actually goes forward is very detailed. Now, how would everybody handle the level of detail in these short 2-day travels? Of course, we could all say that, yes, they might end up with an encounter, but if it's just a short, quick 2-day thing, are you just going to describe the travel and then get to a night watch? Are you just going to describe it until you get to a particular place where, depending on what they rolled for a perception check as they were walking, where you describe what they see because there's a potential encounter here? How do you handle mechanically I guess on that spectrum of just the montage of describing the trip to the hour by hour approach of, the detail and the tracking, the level of resources that you had and having to forage for food or track or do sorts of things like that? How detailed do you generally get whenever you're just talking about a quick journey? And Jared, I guess we'll start with you with this, since you touched on that already.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to anything around like the resource management of food and water and weight and all of that, I also find that extremely boring, as well as the rest of my table. Honestly, I find it's very few and far between that people actually use things like that nowadays. For a short journey, I'd say even less. So I guess when it comes to the amount of detail, a lot of times I just like to make sure that I'm putting in transition words and just a lot of details there in order to get the feeling of the passage of time. If there isn't anything, otherwise it's just a matter of, me saying like it's the afternoon, and as the afternoon goes by, you see something or another out in the distance, and if the party decides to go out there and look at it, then great. But if they pass it up, then I just kind of wait for everyone to give me the nod of like, and then we move on.
Sure. Yeah. What about you, Ben?
I think on a short trip, I'm not going to really track resources. We do track resources in ours, and I actually have an exhaustion system, a stamina system for really, really long travel that incorporates all sorts of activities that you do on the road. But if it's 2 or 3 days, I just can't imagine a scenario where any level of party is actually going to run out of stuff unless you specifically make that a hook. One thing that I might do, though, is I might hop in Facebook Messenger and poll the party individually and be like, hey, on this next leg, do you think there's anything that your character might want to see or experience? Like, I might hand them the opportunity to feed me a hook to use. Or I might be like, hey, Finn, what do you think should happen to Warren on this 3-day trip? And then we'll just do a quick little 15-minute vignette. And just to feel like we're passing the time. And then I'll just use a lot of descriptive words and try to build into, if they're leaving a city and they're going out into the country, I want to make them feel that transition so that they're in the right headspace when they get out into the country, or any number of the, going into steeper mountains, getting out of the foothills, going into steeper hills, that kind of thing. I want to get some of that in just so it feels right when they land there. But otherwise, yeah, I'm not going to track the really gritty detail stuff.
Sure. At what level do you think you would get into the point where you would consider tracking, like a week's journey, perhaps, or what do you think would be the level at which point you would start tracking?
A week.
A week. Okay.
Yeah, it's arbitrary and simple, but I think a week.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where my cutoff would be.
Very cool. Star, what about you, and in terms of handling resources and the various minutia mechanically of travel in short distances?
Yeah, I am. Me and my table is very much against the need to track rations and water and basic ammunition, so such as arrows and things, unless they have a special ability. We have had the discussion that, these people are adventurers. They're better than commoners at doing these things. A basic adventurer should be able to find food for a couple days. We don't feel it's something that should be hard for a basic adventurer to do.
Sure.
So we kind of have this agreement in place because, and as new DMs, as just kind of a thing out there, let your players know if this is something you care about. Don't wait for them to get out in the wilds. My last DM decided to not let us know this, and I am now a cleric in the middle of the woods with 2 rations.
Oh, no.
Thank you for heads up on that one. But yeah, so let your players know that if it's something they need to pay attention to.
Sure.
But yeah, I have an agreement with my players that if we are getting to a place that the players or the characters themselves would know that food and water is hard to find, that's when we start looking at it. So there is a place in our world called the Deadlands, which no one has crossed because there's nothing there. So they know if they want to go in there, they have to be prepared.
Sure. Now, do you tend to do anything like if they just whenever they're going on a journey, do you tend to just deduct a few gold out of their dash just for the supplies that they had to buy? Or do you think it's just something you just don't worry about in general at all?
Yeah, it's something we just in general don't worry about. It's something that makes my players not have fun.
Sure.
So
hey.
it's generally something we go, until it's something that is going to become a problem to overcome. We just don't generally worry about it too much.
Yeah, no, perfectly fine. David, what about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same train of thought as Star there. There's only been a few times that it's really come up, like the resource management thing, and the tables that I've been at have been a little more focused on not I don't want to say milestones, but more just bigger plot hooks. Instead of getting it down to the nitty gritty of tracking this, tracking that, it's more event based gameplay that I've been a part of so far, and it's worked pretty well. But listening to you all now, it's oh dang, that would actually be pretty cool to drain resources like that and make it really gritty and it. I think it's just a really cool different style of play that kind of what Star was saying is as DMs and players you have to be on the same page if that's what you want, because if you can't, I feel if any of you all came into my game and you were okay, I'm ready, I've got 16 days of rations ready, I've got this, I've got that, and I was just and you're there, you guys would be what what the heck? So it's yeah, I think I said this before the last question, is it's very just based on the party and the story that you're trying to tell. If your story, if you can get a lot of these cool story elements out of tracking the day-to-day stuff, go for it.
Sure.
Can I jump in? Actually,
go ahead.
Reply to what you had to say there. You said it'd be really cool to get some of this gritty stuff, and it is kind of fun. I had to kind of contort the system a little bit to just make it work for the longer term. Long travel starts to fall apart after about level 4 in most systems, because then you're going to have spells like create food and water, you're going to have fly, you're going to have magical huts, you're going to have access to significant resources to buy horses and all of this other stuff. So I had to manipulate the system a little bit I had to remove a lot of the survival spells just completely from the game. And I told the players I was going to do this. I had to limit their access to full casting classes. No one in the party is a full caster because I wanted to have the early levels where travel is important kind of stretch longer, because once you get teleport, once you get all of these other sort of obstacle defying spells, travel becomes, in my opinion, a little trivial for most adventurers, because that's what it is.
Yeah, very much in the same boat, actually, where instead of going that far along with it, my travel is you cannot get a long rest if you are on the road. So
awesome.
What?
Yeah, so I probably should have mentioned that earlier.
I love it.
So this was purely, I think it's actually a variant in the DMG, but it was Will, who is on our show, one of my co-hosts. It was his brainchild. Basically the idea that we do normal rests when you're in the city. We do this, I forget what the type is called, but basically you realistic or like realism mode when you're on the road, because it's very difficult to get like a real long rest. But like if you're like in a dungeon, then it switches to heroic mode, where a short rest is like an hour and a long rest is like, however long, doesn't matter. So that has made travel much more interesting, because now it's a matter of how do we get across, 7 days when we only have one real long rest. And it actually makes short rests important. It just makes overall resource management something that's actually interesting.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it is that whenever you're talking about, this thing, just like you mentioned, Ben, once you get past a certain level, it becomes less interesting if we're talking about the resource tracking element of it. You could still obviously use it as an opportunity to build out your world, which is one of the things that I use it for a lot as well. You can pass a caravan, and that caravan, if they're coming from the city they're heading towards, that can show you some facts about trade, and some facts about the city, and some facts about the fact that these two places that these people are traveling between have some sort of good relationship. And you could just have these random things that they come across which actually build out the world. So there's lots of other things you can do if you're not tracking resources, but if you are concerned with the tracking of resources, then that does go out the window. Again, create food and water is the big one. As soon as you get that one, you're just like, well, I guess I don't have to worry about this ever again anymore.
Good Barry.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, Lex, did you have anything to jump in on this?
For tracking resources, in general, I save it for inhospitable territories. So traveling through a desert, I'm gonna make you keep track of your water, because what's the point of traveling in a desert if it's not going to suck? But then there's stuff like, by default, having a ranger in the party will make things just that much easier. But one thing that I've been waiting to do, because my current game, like half the party are new to the game, so I'm trying to introduce things slowly. They're about to have like their first journey that's more than like 2 days.
Oh wow.
Sure.
So one thing that I've thought of was, rather than having, like we were saying before, like you don't need to have full-on encounters for every day-long trip, but you could do just small things, which is where I started using passive skills aside from perception and investigation, like
passive survival, and
passive
stuff like
survival, passive athletics. Like, oh, there's a log on the road, and it's just I give them a short description of. I don't have them roll for it. I just go, there's a log on the road. Dave, the fighter, happened to be strong enough to lift it. His passive was high enough. He found like 2 gold of the log, stuff like that.
That's awesome. Good name. Good choice of name there.
And one thing I wanted to do was buying maps being an important part of travel. In a world where the person making maps probably isn't magical, probably isn't a ranger, getting around is probably super dangerous. Like if you want a map of that mountain where a dragon lives, someone had to go to that mountain where a dragon lives. So it probably cost a lot of money. So one thing to do is, rather than making them spend resources on food and water, you just make them spend money on maps.
Like
That's
kind
true.
of like vital instruments for the journey.
Yeah.
Kinda, that's man, that's cool. I
If
like
they're
that a lot.
climbing, they might need to get climbing gear too, stuff like that.
Mm.
Very cool. Now, a lot of early travel with the short journeys and stuff like that is, as Star mentioned, it's quest related stuff. You know, you're in the city you started in and you're sent by the alchemist to go get some supplies, or you're sent by a particular guild to go kill a monster. You're sent out on this short trek, a day or two out from the city. You take care of the problem and then you return. How do you handle return journeys whenever, it's different if you're talking about going back to a city 6 months later in game? That journey, there very well could be some things that are different. You can take some time and describe how the city that was burned down is now being rebuilt, or what have you. But if nothing's changed much, if it's a journey that they've just taken, what is your and anybody can jump in here, what's your philosophy as far as return journeys? Still do you go down to the detail, or is it more so just at this point fast travel because they've been there already?
So I can speak to that one a little bit. Because of the game we're playing, in the fact that all of my players are in a guild, a lot of accomplishing the task is very time pushed. So
Sure.
going up to do it is the fast thing to do. So on their way, I'll usually say like, oh, as you go by, you see the ruins to the side. It's not on the map anywhere. You've never seen this before. Do you stop now and go in there and possibly lose the job? Or do you go, do your job, and on the way back, you have something to do? So that's kind of how I handle
That's
it.
cool.
Is here's this tempting thing. You can go here, but this will disappear. But you can always come back. That's just kind of how I handle it, is put the taster out there and make them want to make that return journey.
Sure.
Adding time-sensitive things to travel adds a lot too.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's just like good basic storytelling. Like if you add like a ticking time bomb or some sort of expiring situation, it will make a decision the characters have to make that might seem like a trivial decision. Like if you put a time restraint on it, it's like, oh dang, I do want to check out these ruins, but we also have to go defeat this dragon before the midsummer solstice or whatever like that. Like that's really cool.
And there's nothing that players hate more than missing out on something,
Oh, yeah.
especially loot or mysteries.
Yeah.
Or that infuriates them utterly.
So did we say these were ruins? This was a beautiful golden castle that says loot all over the side.
When I think about return trips, especially if it's like a little short one, day or two out, day or two back, I think that the return trip back is a good opportunity for a little bit of falling action off after the climax. The climax is the you finished the plot, you got the thing, you saved the dragon from the evil princess. So now you can have some falling action. You can bump into some bit part NPCs that you met on the way out, or you can get some resolution on some tinier threads on the way back, just to add to the sense of catharsis and completion on the way back in. And then when you get back in, what do you get? You get your bag of gold, and that's like boom. There's the end of that chapter.
I love that. That's so good, because I feel like a lot of times, I know I'm guilty of this. A lot of times you try to make each session, each episode, each chapter like as hyped and as like epic as you possibly can. And like, while that's good, as people and as characters and as like people contributing to the story, you kind of need those sort of just like valleys almost in the story. Like you said, you're up on this like huge climax, and then you come down, and then instead of just immediately back up to something epic and crazy, it's like, okay, breathe. Like, how did your characters develop? How did the story change since you just accomplished your goal? Like, I think that's brilliant, what you were just saying.
Yeah. And one thing that I'll often do is, because I totally agree, I love including that slow pace in order for everyone to just reflect on what's going on. But I've also had times where I've gone 3 weeks straight where there's travel. And then which is fine. I mean, again, my players like it. I have included like really large overarching things during it, but then they get to their destination and they get that thing done at that destination in a single session. And then I just ask them, and I'm like, hey guys, look, we just traveled for, basically 4 weeks here. do you just want to like go quick on this next one? And they're like, yeah, that's totally fine. So the one bit of advice I'll offer up to everyone is these are not rigid guidelines. You don't have to make a decision and stick to it 100% throughout the entire campaign. Sometimes it's okay to say, we've been doing the same thing for how long now? I want a change of pace from the player side and from the DM side.
Yeah, and that's something we say a lot here on Plot Hooks is we always say that our podcast is not about setting out hard and fast rules. It's just about prompting ideas and discussion points and figuring out how to help everybody tell the best story that they can, because it does vary. And it's not just varying within group to group. It varies between session to session and how the situation that the party is currently in affects what the individual's desires would be in that scenario. The Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook both have some mechanical things to say about this. The one that I wanted to especially throw out to you is, do you ever go by the official travel pace where you have fast, normal, and slow travel pace, where if you are traveling at a normal speed, everything is just normal. You go your normal speed, 300 feet in a minute, 3 miles in an hour, and 24 miles in a day. If you go at a fast speed, you go a third faster, so 400 feet, but you have a -5 penalty to your passive perception score. So you're able to go faster, but you are much less likely to notice upcoming traps or upcoming events that you might see, like a ruin, like you mentioned. If you go at a slow pace, you are a third slower, but you're able to be stealthy. Do you ask your players, are you going at a fast pace, a normal pace, or a slow pace, or is there a different mechanic that you might have?
I generally assume a normal pace. I don't see any, unless there's like some reason why they need to go slow, I guess I would ask about it. The only thing that I really change up is rules is written. If you have horses, there is 0 change to your speed. But if they have horses and they're taking care of horses, 1, if they leave the horses alone, I'm going to kill them. And 2, they get fast pace for free without the perception issues. So when I map it out and I tell them, hey, it's going to be a 4-day journey, they say, oh, we're taking our horses. And I say, oh, okay, so it's going to be a 3-day journey and you'll probably get there midday on the 3rd day.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
I use the rules for fast paced, normal, and slow to like slightly modified. It doesn't come up often, but like whenever players are about to start a travel, I'll remind them it's a thing they can do. So I'll go, hey, so you're about to go on the road again. If you want to, you can change up the speed to get there faster, slower, whatever. And here's bonuses that come along with it, penalties that come along with it. It hasn't come up often. But once again, my current campaign, half of them are new, and it's still near the beginning of it. So it's not like they've been in like deep in enemy territory or anything yet.
Sure.
I go hard on travel mechanics. I actually what I did was I'm really into grabbing or simplifying mechanics so that they're very easy and fast to use. So I like to think about it as like using a board game mechanic in D&D. So what I did was I wrote a stamina mechanic, which is basically just like their base attack bonus. Sorry, we play Pathfinder. I'm sorry I infiltrated your Dungeons and Dragons.
No,
but,
out. Get out. No, I feel it. You. I played Pathfinder first.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to favor the martial classes a little bit.
Sure.
So it's like your stamina score is going to be like a certain fraction of your base attack bonus plus your constitution modifier, and then everything that you do in a day, including your pace, including the kind of camp activities you do, that's going to cost stamina. And the idea is forcing the players to make day by day choices that affect their resource levels, that make them decide certain little things, whether or not they're going to do something or not do something, take risks, and that kind of thing. And that's how we sort of set the pace. If you want to go faster, it's going to exhaust you, and you won't be able to do things like craft stuff. You won't notice ambushes. You won't be able to set like really complicated traps around your camp that encounters in the night might get around. So if they are careless with their stamina, then they might get punished other ways, sort of leading them down sort of a desperate spiral where it's like, wow, we're really low on food. We're all so tired, and there's this and there's this. So, and the other nice thing that I like about it is it makes them feel like they're traveling. I don't know who I don't know how much cross-country walking people have done, but I've done a fair amount, and it's like, it's tiring. It drains you, like mentally and emotionally. And I kind of want them to always feel some kind of a resource getting pulled out from them just from moving across the country, so that they feel the passage of time that travel is, so that they feel the creaking in the legs and that kind of thing. So I do like that stuff, and I do think it's important if travel is a central component of your story. And if the journey itself is important. If it's not, I mean, if you're going to set piece, like don't agonize these poor people with exhaustive travel mechanics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is all about furthering the narrative and finding out the best way that you can, as a dungeon master or game master in whatever TTRPG you happen to be playing, you figure out a way that you can work this in to best tell the story that your players want to tell. And that goes into the other mechanical aspect, which is often talked about as far as this, and that's getting lost. Because not all travel is on roads. And is there a specific thing that any of you have developed, or I know there is one in the D&D Dungeon Master's Guide, as far as the actual DCs for getting lost and in your survival checks. But is there anything that y'all ever do, or do you generally assume that they're more or less headed in the right direction, unless you're talking about a very long journey?
In general, I don't have my players get lost, not because I don't think it's like a valid tactic or anything, but because if they get lost and then the struggle is just, and then you find your way back on the path, nothing happened essentially. You just added time. So if they get lost, then I'm going to include something to happen while they're lost, and it'll probably have been on purpose and will probably be the next plot hook.
Sure. Yeah, no, that type of thing that's an interesting point, because there are definitely times where you are going through a very difficult scenario, like a haunted forest. Going back to that idea, where you're in this really thick environment and you have to get through it with successful checks, however you want to actually handle that. And as you keep getting lost, then that's where you can throw in one of those either random encounters or those pre-made encounters like you have, Star, where they just, okay, if they do start heading off the path, this now happens. And that is an option for whenever you handle something like that.
It could be like, oh, hey, they found some totally not villain's mansion in the woods or whatever, maybe he works for the current bad guy and you stumbled upon one of his plans or something, the next big bad, you found like his secret alchemy lab or whatever. So yeah,
sure.
That's usually what I use getting lost for.
That I think I'm in the same boat like that. Like, for me, in my stories and my DMing experience, like, story is first and foremost. So like, if I'm having my players try to go to point A and along the way there's checks and the stuff they have to do and they fail all those and they end up at point C, I will try to incorporate that into the story, as opposed to just like, oh, and cool, you've all passed your checks now you're back in the story. Cool, those last 45 minutes didn't actually matter. The story, the getting lost mechanic is, I think it's really cool. But it can sort of derail and sort of slow the story down a little bit. But if you try to make things work for the story, then I think it can help that a lot. And then you still give your characters that idea of like, oh no, we're lost, we're out in the woods, we don't know what to do. Like that's a pretty cool feeling to give your players.
I like what Star said about adventurers are a cut above, so it always feels kind of silly to me. It's like, oh man, like this ranger, this Melisandre Deepwood is gonna get lost.
You had one job, Melisandre.
Like At the very least, I might say you know, if they're out hex exploring or whatever, I may at the very least, like, you've kind of lost track of your destination and you're gonna have a hard time figuring out where you're supposed to go. But I'm always gonna be like, at the very least, you can get back to the road. You can retrace your steps, because unless there's some sort of a magical component like Lex was talking about, unless there's a plot thing going on, I just really see it as a time sink, and not a time sink like narratively, a time sink literally at table time. And yeah.
Well, also in those moments, it can very, very quickly turn into a players versus the DM situation where it's like, oh, the DM is trying to keep us lost, so like we're gonna try to do like, and then I feel like that there's a time for that, like in those like combats and when you're fighting like the final battle and stuff, like, yeah, you definitely want that feel of like, I'm going to kill you. But like if you're just trying to get to the next town and you're like, dude, we've spent 6 days in these woods, like what is wrong with you? Like it just, it really, at the end of the day, I feel like everyone has to have fun. And if you're getting your players lost, or if your players are getting lost and you can't find a way to bring them back on the path, both in the story and having fun, I think that's a big misstep, and in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think it also makes for that awkward experience where, as you were saying, it's been like 6 days and they're still lost, and as the DM, you just want to be like, I guess you guys get back on track, because I'm really tired of this, you know. And then everyone feels a little bit cheated, to be honest. Like, I've had that situation where it's like, no, I want to do it the right way, you know. But sometimes you just can't, because it just is boring, and you just got to move on.
The power of that screen that we all had behind is like, oh yeah, I can just change whatever the hell I want to change.
No DM screen here.
No, that's awesome.
Nope.
Baby, open rolls.
Yeah.
Dang, you guys are hardcore.
I don't want.
It's so fun.
I won't cheat. You won't cheat. If you die, it's the dice. My bad.
Yeah, and when it comes to getting lost, I mean, I kind of have the same opinion as everyone else. Is there needs to be a purpose behind it.
Sure.
So I'm a lover of the Sorrow Sworn. So getting lost means they show up, which is great fun. But there's also like I said, my players are usually under time crunch. So getting lost is a bad thing. I mean, they also have availability of getting things like find the path. And when they remember they have a map that if you stand on it, it shows you the direction you need to go to get where you need to go. If they remember they have it. But so that was kind of my way of making it so getting lost has a detriment, but they have ways to get around it. I also have a ranger, so they don't get lost very often, but the possibility is there. It's just not a huge aspect of the game, but it's interesting if they do.
Which is actually a big thing that I used to do when I had a ranger. I would set up scenarios, like just descriptive scenarios, as to why they didn't get lost because they had a ranger, to make the ranger feel like they were more useful. Because one of the biggest issues you see time and time again when talking about the ranger class is that its entire thing is it goes around the game. It's like, yeah, we just get rid of the entire fun of the game. So instead, I would bring it up and I'd say like, oh, you know, you guys kind of wander off for a little bit, but the ranger takes a moment, listens to the sound of the water, finds his way back, and, you know, you guys continue on without issue. But awesome. That said, once the ranger left the group, because he did leave for reasons, whatever, but I stopped doing that entirely, because it's getting lost still isn't fun, but it gave the ranger a reason. And I won't say not fun. I'm totally in line with everyone else. If it's for story reasons, if you have something bigger planned, that's great. But you know, maybe I'll throw a survival check in every once in a while if they're in like totally uncharted areas, and have something, you know, up my sleeve just to make for an interesting encounter.
Yeah.
Sure.
And if you really want to throw getting lost in there, I don't know if you guys have seen of the journey pool from the Angry DM.
I've
heard of that.
One of you posted about that in the...
Yeah, that I found it the other day because I haven't done a lot of long-term travel, so I was trying to find something to talk about.
Here's your time to shine. Exactly.
It's not even my idea. But essentially, there's a few reiterations on it of getting lost gets you a consequence die. So every day the DM rolls the amount of consequence dies you have, and that can be you don't get to the city on time, you fall down a waterfall. Like there's a bunch of different things that you can decide happen because players are making decisions, and that's
but
just
we're in
one
the
of those
desert.
Yeah, you're in the desert now.
How did I fall?
Congratulations.
How did I fall down a waterfall?
That's what happens when you get a -1. You find a desert or waterfall in the desert.
You found an oasis. Good job. You're in the Underdark now.
And your legs broke.
Yeah.
That sounds like that's the way you were describing that sounds really cool because it sounds like that could be a marriage between like very detailed, very like grindy travel, like and also getting things done relatively quickly. You could be like, cool, I'm not going to go through all of this. We're just gonna we're gonna do this, and these 3 consequences happen because X, Y, and Z, and then but now you're in the city. Like that sounds pretty cool, actually.
Kind of reminds me of Powered by the Apocalypse with like
Exactly,
the keeper making hard moves and that kind of thing, which I always really like. Like the consequence doesn't always have to be immediate. He can save that and use it later. That's really good.
I think that's such a cool mechanic.
I know.
There was a really cool system I had a DM use like 3 years ago. She had this thing where like magic items were sometimes made just by being near an event that happened.
Ooh.
So one thing that happened during travel was like we survived an avalanche, and because like I think it was like someone's dagger or something, like because we went through an avalanche, survived, and went through a whole bunch of rolls. At the end of it, the dagger was enchanted by like the magic of something happening.
That's super
Interesting.
cool.
Interesting.
Which I thought was a super cool system, and it also means like you can have something like being lost doesn't have to be well, like I was saying, kind of contradicting what I was saying, where it doesn't have to be a plot hook. It can just be, here's a way to get a cool item.
Mm-hmm.
You got lost, you found a sword in like a tree stump in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just to clarify then, it's not that it's not a plot hook, it's that you're making the getting lost memorable. It has purpose.
Yeah, memories
Purpose.
can be just as important as like adding to the plot.
Sure.
Well, also, I think that like what you were just saying, giving that purpose and those memories, like I think it's really satisfying for players, and I think this is where a lot of travel can come in. It's really satisfying for players just to have those moments that can benefit the story, but aren't necessarily like super tied into the story. Like you could find this magic sword that like maybe in the very end of the campaign, this is the weapon that like defeats the ultimate evil,
right.
Or it's like you just had a really cool moment with like you had a tiefling and a halfling, and they both were like kind of at each other's throats, but like because of this getting lost, now they're bonded together. Like I think that kind of like what you're saying is it gives you opportunities to not necessarily give some super crazy backstory, lore, or information, but give your characters a chance to develop some like front story, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of tabletop RPGs versus any other storytelling medium is that we don't have to stay as like direct towards the final end goal of the plot. Like in a book, if a book randomly just had an avalanche that led to literally nothing but getting a cool knife, that doesn't add anything to the book. But in D&D, that adds a story to tell. That adds a cool event for a character. It could add a bonding moment, saving like another character's life. That was a moment for my character at the time, which was a ranger. He ended up getting like a connection with like wolves, because that's part of the way we survived. Was I just like called out to nature, went, someone help us please, and like a pack of wolves came to help us.
So cool.
And so from then on, he like kind of devoted himself to wolves and canines and stuff.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's also interesting to me to have like whenever situations like that happen, is to call them back, because if you've got something as big as an avalanche happens, hey, how about 3 sessions down the road, you all of a sudden interact with somebody who was caught in that same avalanche. You can call back these memorable moments that happened during your travel by bringing them back into the story and making them more part of a narrative by how it affected the world around them and not just the party. Because with big astronomical things, it isn't just something that happened to the party, it's something that affected the whole world that you're a part of.
Bonus points if that's if that thing that is referenced is something that the party themselves set off in the first place, because then they get that awkward tension where they're like, oh, you got caught in an avalanche? Oh, that's horrible.
Dang,
sorry to hear about that.
That just happens sometimes. No one to blame but nature.
There?
Definitely not us. That's
you seen one, did you?
What I like about travel moments is they're kind of low stakes, but they can kind of also be high stakes. I was actually thinking about an event from my game where they just sort of stumbled on this shrine, and the random treasure table got them this amulet, and there was supposed to be a fight, and unbeknownst to me, they had planned to talk their way out of this fight and actually managed to do so, which I was not prepared for. So they keep rolling these like rage dice diplomacy checks, and I didn't know what to do. So finally I was like, okay, well, the magical statue says that you can take the amulet and borrow it if you go find the heiress to the person who's buried here and give it to her. And I was like, I'll use that sometime down the road. And then I'm like, I'll just keep that in my back pocket and use it later. So then they happen to, in the next sort of big part of the narrative arc, one of the players comes to the conclusion where they're like supposed to find this person. And she's like, oh, that's the person we're supposed to give the amulet to. In my head, I'm like, yes, it absolutely is. Totally not planned. But what was really cool about it for me is it gave me some ammunition to just work with from a plot thread standpoint, and it gave a character a moment to shine. And she's not really much of a talker, so it was really cool that like she was the one that hopped to this conclusion, and it's like, yes, I got to give you your moment, you know. And but the whole thing didn't have to shake out like that because I didn't plan it that way in the first place. It was all sort of a random treasure table feeding us a little thing and a bunch of dice rolls. So like there's kind of low risk narrative beats that you can throw in when you're doing travel stuff that can be useful or can just sit and just exist and never come up again. And that's okay too, because that's kind of what travel's like. You know, things just kind of come and go.
Sure.
It's awesome.
Well, a couple more things you want to hit before we wrap up. It's been mentioned in passing by several of you, and that is the concept of traveling under very adverse conditions. In my own world, just like you described, Star, with your Deadlands, there's something called the War Wastes, which is an area where there was it's essentially magical Verdun. If you know what that is, it's an area where there was a 31-year-long battle, which essentially destroyed all life. There's even gashes in the weave there, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff which goes on there, into the point of they started trying to travel through there, and one of them has a Dairn's instant fortress, which, if you know what that is, it just makes a fortress, only he's a druid, so it's a giant oak tree. But awesome. Aside, that's cool. The first night they're there, they realize that this thing that they see called the Wailing Fog, they now realize it's the Wailing Fog because all of a sudden all these ghosts start appearing and just phasing through into their fortress, and they have to figure out exactly a way to actually prevent themselves from just dying on the first night. And there's all sorts of really interesting places which in about every setting we create, because they're really interesting to explore and really interesting to tell stories with, where you just have this place where something so terrible happened, and there's all these effects on the environment and in the world based on whatever occurred. And traveling through those things can often be very profitable because of the arcane objects and different things you can find, but it can also be incredibly dangerous. So how do you handle it any differently, or if you do handle it any differently, whenever you're talking about going into such a traumatic place? And I guess we'll start with you, Stars. Have you tried to venture into the Deadlands at all yet?
They have not, because it's technically an illegal portion of our world.
But
they're gonna have to go there for plot reasons eventually. But essentially, the plan for me is to make it that they have to go through certain cities to get there, and by getting through that, they're going to get the hints of there's no food, there's no water. You have to have some sort of animal transport. Displacer beasts are actually the transport of choice there.
Yes.
Nice.
But then there are other portions in the world, like there is a city much similar to yours that a magical battle happened. So any spell that's casted there goes through the the sporadic magic table. I'm blanking on the actual term right now. So
Wild
anybody who
magic
casts
sorcerer table.
wild magic
Yeah.
sorcerer. So anybody who casts spells there is going to go that way. So it's one of those that my opinion is that through narratively and through interactions with NPCs, characters should be prepared before they hit it. They should
Sure.
know what they need to do. There might be surprises, like you're going to figure out the wild magic table pretty fast because cleric's going to cast a spell and suddenly fireball is going to come out and they're not going to know what that was. But other than that, it's just making sure your players are prepared so they don't feel cheated when they're going
Yes.
into those areas.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in my scenario, whenever they were in this particular area, they are sent there to explore the area because in the first part of the campaign, it concluded by them essentially toppling the government. And that government had kept that area off limits. And the new government wanted to explore. And so they were sent in as the heroes of the previous battles to actually explore this area with the knowledge of it being incredibly dangerous, but no real specifics. They have to have that sort of, even if it's minor like that, whenever there's no real information because this area has been off limits, but there has to be, I completely agree, that giving of information so that they don't just die all of a sudden because ghosts are attacking them in the middle of the night, in the middle of their watch. They have to have some sort of heads up, as you could say.
I very much agree with that. Like in my story, my characters are about to run an underwater mission, and there's probably not going to be a whole lot of like actual travel, but just kind of like what you were talking about is like, I feel like there is somewhat of a responsibility as a DM, as a GM, as someone running a campaign like this. I feel not the obligation. I feel the responsibility to provide my players with everything they're going to need so they can focus on telling the story. Because like if you're going into like a super hostile situation, like underwater, like the place with like up in space, like no air, something that like is going to be that they're going to have to constantly be thinking about, I feel like that could very quickly turn into a just like managing your character situation, which isn't bad. It just the focus I like to put on is like the story, and I want to give my players everything they need to feel like they can tell the story. But I'm also probably going to take away their scuba tanks too at some point because it's really exciting.
Oh yeah.
Dispel magic on water breathing.
That specific situation came up in a fight I ran like 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
They're fighting a creature underwater, and it's like, how are you fight? Oh, dispel magic.
All of a sudden, that just gets really intense.
If I'm going to send my party into like your Badlands or your ugly place, I want to do two things to them. I want to force them to watch their resources drain really quickly, like way faster than they. Obviously, they're prepared. Obviously, I've told them just how bad it is, but it actually has to be just a little bit worse than they were even thinking, because I want them to feel a little bit of dread. And once they've got the dread, I want to force hard decisions. There should be people out there, and they have to decide, are we going to give up some of our precious rations and water to help these people out? There should be opportunities to delay them on their journey so that they always have this ticking clock of how many days of rations and water they have. And then it's like, oh my God, are we going to take this delay? They should always be just like this close to exhausted. And then I throw something, oh, here's your temple full of golden treasure. Do you really want to risk wearing yourself out to go in there and do this? Oh, I love that idea. I'm going to steal this, by the way. I love that idea of not letting them take long rests.
That's awesome.
I'm not going to use
it. I'm not going to use it for everyday travel, but if they're going to the Badlands or the desert or whatever, I'd be like, oh, by the way, your sleep here is not restful and you're not going to get the benefits of it. You're only going to get a little bit back. So I just want them to like be like, oh, this really sucks. And then, Ghost Storm is a really good idea too. That's outstanding. I love that. That's great.
Well, I think it's that just going to that no long rest thing. I feel like there's so many times in like dungeons or in like very intense like series of episodes or sessions, like players will kind of abuse the DM, like, we're going to take a long rest. It's like, well, okay, like, but like just being like, well, sorry, you actually are in like a scorching hot desert. Where are you going to do that? Like, are you just going to like bake out under the sun? Like, I think that's really, really cool.
In 3.5, players often criticized what they called the 15-minute workday, where you would just have one big fight, and then you would just go take your long rest, and then you would come back and do the next big fight, and you would just sort of wear the dungeon down through attrition. That was
Awesome.
Yeah, it's worked really well for my group because the catharsis of getting to a place where they can actually rest is so great. It's palpable as you see everybody's faces just like, okay, we like they'll look at me, they go, do we get a real long rest? Some people's DMs worry about like, oh, are we leveling up? They're like, do we get a real long rest now?
I just want to sleep.
Yeah,
oh my God.
And for what it's worth, I don't add like exhaustion every single night. That would be ridiculous. That's just not even worthwhile. But in like a desert scenario, honestly, all that I add is I will have like, if you're not suited to the desert, like we've got one person who's a tabaxi, so they were born and raised in the desert. But if you weren't, then I just have them make a Constitution saving throw, and if they fail, they gain a level of exhaustion once per day. I'm not going to say that that's like the most interesting possibility. I actually really liked what you were talking about, Ben, and I think that just that idea of like get in there and force hard choices as quickly as possible is what I've missed from a lot of times where I've tried or have had somebody else try to make travel more resource intensive. A big thing in Out of the Abyss, that campaign setting, I don't know if anybody's played that, but a big portion of it is you're traveling through the Underdark for very long periods of time. We tried to do a little bit grittier resting and like tracking food, tracking water, but the DM never really took any of the resources from us. There wasn't any like major drain, so it just very quickly got to the point where it's like, do we have enough food and water? And it's like, we could be lost for 6 weeks and we're good. And he recognized that, and then like years later we're talking about it, and it's like, yeah, I really should have just had something come and take all of your food. And it's like, yes, you super should have, because then it would have been a lot more interesting instead of something that we all just got fed up with after a couple weeks.
Sure.
One thing, this is actually going back a little bit for going back to places you've been. One way to change up a journey or make it more dangerous is just bad weather. Which can also, it's
true.
like, oh, we're going back somewhere we've been, and it's going to be the exact same travel. Just have a really bad storm, and now it's a different journey. Makes places more dangerous. And also, going back to everyone mentioning like their Badlands and stuff like that. Those areas are always fun. I love being a player, getting to go to those and having to worry about it. It's like, oh, where's the magic thing? Oh, magic Chernobyl? Oh, okay.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
Great.
That's exactly how the one in my setting is essentially, it's like Verdun mixed with Pripyat is essentially what the place is. It's miserable, it's awful, it's a giant fungal forest because that's the only thing that lives there anymore.
Y'all are straight evil. This is insane.
No, it's great because that gives so many opportunities because they're not sure what to expect, and you can throw so many different things. For instance, like they figured out really quickly that underground was safe in this area, and what they figured out was while this area has literally been quarantined for over a millennium, they actually just last session came across the Ichma set, which is the race that we just released, which is a race that lives here in this environment, has bonded with the mushrooms, and they look kind of like, because they're descended originally from tieflings and elves and humans who lived in the region before it was destroyed, and now they can't leave because they can't go above ground, and they're just essentially live in this massive canyon. And now this party is just, they're now in this situation where they're in this terrible situation. They're just supposed to scout it out. And now they found this random society, which is thriving in complete attrition and hardship. And there's just so many options for throwing random things, which just completely throw off their expectations for what they were expecting to see, which I find really interesting, and it provides a lot of opportunities for them to just take situations and run with them.
Yeah, and people living in those areas, it's always something really interesting in that, like, for some reason, humanity, doesn't matter where it is, we will want to live there, even if it's completely inadvisable. Like there's a part of the U.S. that is just known for tornadoes, yet we still live there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why we're like this. It's completely illogical, but people will do it. They'll live wherever they put their house, no matter how dumb of an idea it is. So, like, oh yeah, this area is plagued with dragons. You're gonna find people that live there for some reason.
Yeah,
People are gonna live there.
Yeah. I mean,
I live
it's
in
like,
Cleveland, man. You don't have to tell me twice.
Cleveland is plagued with dragons. That's crazy.
I mean, like you kind of talked about like the magic Chernobyl. Like, why would someone live there? Well, maybe it's super easy to make powerful magic items there.
yeah.
However, like in mine, the ground also raises the dead. So
In mine, they just literally couldn't get out, and so they just ended up building this society over 1,000 years because they were stuck there. And so they just ended up. They've got like mycelium from the fungus snaking all the way through underneath their skin now. It's just, but yeah, I love building. I love world building and all that too, because it is such a real interesting place to try to figure out all these interesting obstacles for your travel and interesting things to encounter, which you never would anywhere else.
My big takeaway from this is that we really need to all get together and build a campaign setting where every inch of land is just awful. It's just absolutely terrible because y'all got some messed up ideas.
Ghost
The
Maelstrom,
real
let's
descent
go.
to
you can blame Monsters and Multiclass for my ideas. They all come from there.
You're
Oh,
welcome.
Jared, that's your fault.
Yep.
Thanks.
I mean, nothing is essentially original. Like the Ghost Maelstrom that I have is essentially based off of Tolkien's Dead Marshes. Only instead of just being in the water, they come out of the water. So instead of Frodo falling face first after seeing the ghost in the water, no, the ghost just comes out of the water and gets him. So but there's so many different awesome things like that. The last thing that I wanted to hit before we closed out for this this session is what a couple of you mentioned down at the beginning was downtime activities. As we're doing travel, there's so many different circumstances as we've kind of worked up from that 2-day simple trip to traveling through Chernobyl. There's all sorts of different situations you can encounter, and I know there's lots of different philosophies as far as doing downtime activities. Some obviously have to take place in a controlled setting like a library or a workshop or something like that, but there's lots of different things you can do around the campfire as you're going into your watch for the evening. How do you all handle that as far as downtime activities are concerned?
Because I know my game is really travel focused, I sort of had to bake that into the pie, right? I wanted to make sure that I had provocative downtime things that people could do. So the party has a little magic circle, a little magic alchemical circle that they can use to build items through sort of the magic in the world and enchant things so that they can do it on the road rather than needing to go to a forge or do this or that. The other thing is I've got one of the characters is really bookish. And so what I do is now and again, I'll put him in a position where he can get his hands on a book, but it's a really big one and it's going to take time to pore over. And then he can spend downtime. And then each one of the books, I'll put 1 to 3 secrets in it. And so he spends some downtime, maybe rolls a check, like a history check, and I'll reveal a little bit of the plot to him. So if he wants to spend 4 hours after walking all day, then he'll be rewarded by me hinting, here's a little tidbit that you got in the book that's might become relevant in the future and definitely will. And then I'll put 3 of those per book. And then there's been a couple of moments where he's been like, oh my God, that was in my book. This is actually this like seemingly innocuous detail is actually super critical to the plot. Ben, you scumbag. Or I'll have little, once again, I like to ask my players for little vignettes that they might be interested in encountering. Like, someone was like, oh, I'd like to find a really interesting herb and just experience finding an herb out in the mountains. I'm like, okay, we'll do that. Or one person's like, ooh, can we bump into like a trapped animal and like that'll be like a scene? So they bumped into an owl bear that got caught in a bear trap and had to sort of role play saving this owl bear without the owl bear actually murdering them. And so that was kind of a fun little moment. So if you are planning on having downtime be a part of your travel, then you kind of have to think of little creative ways to make the downtime fit into the travel dynamic. A lot of that is by watching media that involves a lot of travel. What's it, Over the Garden Wall? What's the one where they go into the spooky woods?
Gosh. Yes, Over the Garden Wall.
Yeah, like any sort of media about kids getting lost in the woods and there's fantastical stuff going on. Just devour it, and you'll be full of interesting ideas to use for that kind of thing. Yeah.
For downtime in the stuff that I've run, it's similar, but a little bit different than what Ben was just saying. Almost every single time I've ever done downtime, I have not planned a single moment of it. I will just sit down with the character or with the players and be like, all right, well, you have X amount of time, you have X amount of gold, you have whatever. What would your character want to do in this moment? And then we like just kind of workshop and figure something out based on in that moment. And it's a little bit difficult and a little bit scary to do it that way, but it kind of like what Ben was saying is it gives you these moments to just really work with your characters and really work with your players to like foreshadow things, to kind of put little threads of what's going on. It gives your characters a chance to like work on their own skills, work on like read books. Like one of my guys, he went and got a tattoo, and at first I'm like, that's a really huge waste of time. Why would you do that in this campaign? But we like, turned it into this like really cool, meaningful moment that like now like every time he goes somewhere, people can like, tell exactly where he's from, and like so it's like there's moments you can make with your players with downtime. I used to think downtime was not a great usage of time. I'm like, this is boring. People just want to like fight things and cast fireballs. Why are we sitting around not doing anything? But it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. It gives those breathing moments of like, cool, I'm gonna pause and like reflect on all the things I just went through in the travel and the campaign and whatever, and now I'm gonna like grow and like be able to move my story forward from there, which I think is very, very cool.
Sure.
So I know when I'm playing, I'm the type of player that loves downtime. I love crafting things. I love playing anything that, like, okay, I played an alchemist before, and every time we rested anywhere, I immediately spent all my gold on, like, I'm going to invent a bomb arrow. I'm going to make a sword that makes you itchy. I got nothing to do.
I know there's no wrong way to play characters, but you are playing the alchemist correctly.
So itchy. Oh my god.
Why did you make this? I don't know. I could.
I just could, man.
It's fantastic.
So as a DM, I try and give opportunities for that. There's one campaign I did where I went out of my way for every player. I made custom crafting feats for each player so that each of them had their own individual things to do. So one of them was a ranger, I think. Yeah, a ranger, animal companion. So his downtime was just training his bear to have interesting combat abilities. And one of them was a bard. His downtime was like basically we gave him a way to like custom think scrolls, but like rather than making a scroll, he just hum a song in an ally's ear, and if they sang the same song, a magical thing could happen. I gave every player their own thing, which I wholly regret doing because it took so much time to make all of those. But awesome. I did it, and it was fun.
We all have something we gave to our players that we regret in one way, shape, or form.
Instantly.
Very much so.
There's always been that item where it's like, oh, here's this cool item, and you didn't read it totally, and then they read it totally, and you're like, I gave you what?
Wait, 12d8? Oh, man.
Yeah. Excuse me?
I was not expecting that.
Cube of Force. Oh, I'm sorry. This villain can cast Disintegrate. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Your
Really
QV
like
Force
that
is gone now.
Yeah, my players just got an instant fortress because I didn't fully pay attention to what I was doing. So they just got a fort now. Yay!
Hooray! I'm so
And
sorry.
immediately they're like, "Who can we drop this on?"
Oh yes. Oh yes.
What have I done?
And they're lawful good players, right?
Not a one. Not a one.
With my games, I've really let any type of downtime activities during travel be very self-guided, unless I have something that I want to do for story reasons. So things for story reasons, like I'll have the cleric's god talk to them in a dream, and I consider that kind of downtime because I'll do it during their watch, or like the warlock, their patron. Or any type of interaction they want to have in between party members. When it comes to actual, like, hey, I want to practice, the pan flute, and I want to start learning that as an instrument. I honestly can say I haven't come up with a fantastic method yet that I'm in love with. All that I've done is steal from some other games that rely on pass-fail mechanics, where basically it's like, you spend your watch or you spend your downtime here practicing the pan flute, roll a performance check, and if you get over this DC, then I'll give you a pass. If you get under this DC, you get a fail, but you need to accumulate, let's say, 7 passes and 3 fails. And once you get all of those, you can then gain proficiency with the pan flute. So that's something that, like, honestly, I don't go into it too deep, like Lex had just mentioned that he did, mainly because I don't think my players care that much about it. I would like to do more, but they're just not that interested.
Sure.
My players would love that. They love filling progress bars. They really enjoy carrots dangling in front of them. Even if they know there's a carrot, they will even if they know I'm holding it behind them on a stick and I can give it to them whenever I feel like it, they were like, oh yeah, give me that carrot. Give me that. Let me chase it. I really want to chase it. Let me get it the right way.
Please place me directly in the Skinner box.
Oh man, they're hooked on it, dude. It's true.
That's awesome.
Are you sure your table's not just dogs?
We have had the conversation about what breed are we. I'm a golden, but I won't go into the other ones. But yeah, that's
question answered, but also many more questions given. You are a good DM.
I can actually speak on this from the exact opposite side of the spectrum. My players do not use downtime, ever. I try to give it to them, but they don't use it because they don't see the point. So for players who have the idea that downtime has no point, figure out something to do in your downtime. It helps your DM more than anything. Like I have players who their, for lack of a better term, nerdiness life is about as long as we've been playing D&D, which is about 3 years. So they're still playing Skyrim in their mind of, we get the thing, we go do the thing. And so they're still trying to transition into the actual full-blown role play still. We're getting there. But yes, there are times where I'm like, okay, you guys are on the fire. Do you want to do anything? Nope, let's do watch. Next day. Okay. So, and if that's what the players want to do, that's great.
Sure.
But just from the other side of the DM screen, for anybody who hasn't DM'd that's listening to this, you guys' interactions with each other gives us stuff to do. I honestly still don't know what one of my players' goals is. They want to attain knowledge. Okay. What does that mean to you? I don't know. We'll figure it out on the way. Okay, well, interactions with your other players tells me what that is. So definitely, if you don't have a skill that you want to get, or you don't really have anything like tangible, at least talk to other players so your DM kind of learns about your character, and we can plan for you.
Yeah.
That's so big.
That's awesome.
Nothing pleases me more than when a player during one of their interactions accidentally says something that can be used ironically later.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, yeah, when I was a little kid, I used to be really afraid of spiders, and I'll be like,
Excellent.
spider encounter, huh?
Wolf is coming in here
Here
soon.
they come.
What's up my
Oh.
sleeve? Yep, it's spiders.
That's awesome.
That's so good. I think that's so important, and I think that's like what you were just saying, Star. I think that's one of the main, in my opinion, one of the easiest benefits of travel is just those moments where the players can sort of step out of that Skyrim of like the goal attaining and more of like, okay, cool, I'm actually walking, pun intended, a mile in this character's shoes. Like I'm literally going through the actions of like upkeep and like I'm finding food. I'm going from point A to point B, and it gives you an opportunity to like, how would this character respond in those moments? I think that's a great point.
Sure.
Yeah. And for my mind, how I'm trying to get them to do more of this interaction is presenting them with NPCs that are inconsequential. Like they have met a farmer on the road that's, hey, I'm going to travel with you for a while. And I can then kind of force the conversation because this NPC wants to talk. And hopefully that will eventually transition into them talking with each other.
It's very smart.
I have one player that wants to, but they feel that if they're the one that always does it, they feel like they're taking over the game. So it's a little bit hard, but we're getting there.
Sure.
I believe in you.
Yeah, that's good.
And I feel like that like inter-party role-playing could be an entire roundtable by
Absolutely.
itself.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yes, we will definitely, I think, have more of these as we go forward with plot hooks for some of the more in-depth things that are very difficult to discuss and there's lots of different opinions on, because I don't want it to just me and or one of my co-hosts talking about something that has so many different perspectives. But I think that's about all the time that we have. I want to thank all you for joining me and being on the show and offering your perspectives. If y'all want to let us know where you could be found online, so that anyone who wants to check you out can do so. Starting with you, I guess, Ben.
I'm Benjamin. I'm the Dungeon Master for Lawful Great Adventures. If you're interested in checking out our modest pod, we are hosted on Anchor. You can find us on Twitter. That's kind of our primary social account. That's at @great_lawful. We're also on Facebook, Lawful Great Adventures, and Instagram at Lawful Great Adventures. Look forward to hearing what you think about the show.
Awesome. Star?
I'm Star Shinobi. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Star Shinobi. I also make those little useful to pseudo-useful magic items under the Daily DND Magic hashtag if you're interested. Those are
So
out there for you.
So useful. Oh my gosh. Not pseudo useful. They're like the best magic items ever.
I don't know. I made one that makes you smell like cheese. I don't.
How is that bad?
I love the crow one that you did a few days ago. That one was awesome. Jared?
Yeah. Once again on the podcast, Monsters and Multiclass. Honestly, best way to find everything that we do is going to monstersandmulticlass.com. But if you want to, find our social media at monsters_multi. If you're on Reddit, you can go to our Monsters and Multiclass, where we post a bunch of stuff and you can, talk with other people who like the show. Yeah, that's mainly it. I don't use my own personal Twitter. That's lame.
Lex, what about you?
You can find me on Twitter at call_me_they. You can find me on DM's Guild as my name, Lex Olden. I'm eventually going to have a YouTube channel for those video essays I was talking about, but I currently don't, so we'll get there.
Sure.
I'm working on plenty of stuff. I'm always busy. So check me out.
Sure.
Give me money sometimes, maybe.
So good.
Finally, David.
Hi again, everybody. My name is David. I am the Dungeon Master for From Afar podcast. You can find us either at our website, which is just FromAfarPodcast.com. We are on Twitter at From Afar Podcast, and Instagram, I'm pretty sure, is the same, just at From Afar Podcast. If you're looking for me, I'm just at David Tilstra. Yeah, come by, hang out with us. We got a Discord. We got stuff happening on Twitter. I mean, you're all busy people. Do whatever you want to do, but we'd love to love to see around the interwebs. But yeah, thank you so much, Samuel, for doing this. This has been a blast. This is such a good conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was super fun.
Yeah, thank you all for joining me, and thank you all out there for listening. And thanks from the rest of the Plot Hooks team: Matt, Mike, Dave, Steve, Zach, Becca, and podcast Pupper Ellie. We will see you all again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks.